Welcome to the Curious Concierge. I'm Justin Sun, and this is a podcast about the dreamers, shapers, and innovators redefining hospitality across Asia. Each episode goes behind the scenes of the hotels and villas to restaurants and cultural spaces, where we explore the places where we stay, gather, and experience, and the people who bring them to life. These are the stories behind the stays. Let's get curious. Wellness is no longer just a spa menu. It's becoming one of the most powerful forces reshaping luxury hospitality globally. My guest today is Nikhil Kapur, a veteran hotelier and wellness strategist whose career spans leadership roles across the Oberoi Group, ISTA Hotels, and the iconic destination retreat, Ananda in the Himalayas. After years of seeing firsthand how well-being programs can transform guests' lives and hotel performance, Nikhil launched Transformative Wellness and SpaCraft, a consulting platform helping hospitality brands design integrated well-being ecosystems from concept through operations. Today, we talk about the business of wellness, the mental health shift in travel, and what hotels must do to stay relevant in a world where guests are increasingly searching for meaning, not just luxury. Nikhil, welcome to the Curious Concierge.
Morning. Hi, Justin. Good to see you.
Likewise, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. You've spent decades in luxury hospitality, from Oberoi to Ananda in the Himalayas. And now you're advising hotels globally on how to embed well-being, not just as an amenity, but as a strategic pillar. So today, I really want to explore not just wellness as a trend, but wellness as a philosophy, as a business model, and maybe even the future language of luxury. So would love to start at the beginning. Your background has moved from traditional luxury operations into something far more transformative. Would love to learn a little bit on how and what first drew you into hospitality, and when did wellness become central to your thinking?
Okay. So interestingly, hospitality was by accident. It was not something that I looked out for, because when I started my career, it was not such a big deal in India. There were not many hotel companies and not so much going on in that space. But the Oberoi Group had a program where they took you on as a management trainee and then trained you for about 2 years, and then you became an assistant manager, which in those days was quite interesting because it gave you training and a job at the same time. So you could continue your education, get a postgraduate, diploma in your bag, and have a job soon after that. So I joined the program, and then, of course, worked with Oberoi Hotels for about 14 years, which was my foundation in hospitality. And anyone who knows hotels in India or even globally now actually knows that Oberoi Hotels is perhaps one of the finest training grounds for hotel professionals. And you'll find them all over the world now in leading positions and doing some wonderful work in the space. So I worked with them, went through their two brands. Those days they had two brands. One was the Oberoi and the other was the Trident. So I spent my career working, almost equally in both the brands, which was quite interesting because it was a great learning. And then sometime around 2005, I had an opportunity to actually create a new brand for another group. And that led to my work with ISTA Hotels, where we set up this brand of young, cool, hip, very interesting activity driven hotels in IT centers. So Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, where you had IT business, we set up those hotels. So we did about 5 of them. And then there was this unfortunate incident of the Mumbai attacks. So a lot of the big IT companies decided that they wanted to work only with internationally branded hotels. And we were just a small homegrown company. So that's the time we handed over management to Hyatt Hotels, and I moved on to Ananda, which was essentially the original hotel or the original resort that the company owned. It was the same ownership as ISTA Hotels. And although I'd spent my whole life in business hotels, with a little bit of work in resorts, it was, I think, an eye-opener that something like Ananda could exist, because, you know, it was a place where people changed, and hence the name transformative. That's where it comes from, because I saw a lot of people completely transform the way they came in, and it stayed with us for a couple of weeks. And when they left, they were completely different people. So, and that's something that really caught my fancy. And I thought that, and it was holistic. It was not medical. There was no pill popping. There were no procedures. It was all holistic. And then I realized that if some level of holistic well-being interventions could make such a lot of difference. That space is worth exploring. And that's how I kind of got interested in the subject. I studied a little bit more about well-being. Of course, it helped me with my role because I was leading that resort. And I studied a little more about the subject. I got more involved with what wellness was. And as I got more involved, I got more and more engaged with the subject. And the idea of merging or balancing hospitality and wellness kind of appealed to me because remember, these are pre-COVID days. So it was a very, very different time. There was a very little understanding of wellness in those days. People were talking more about cures or just a spa vacation, go and get a few massages. So this space of well-being in hospitality was not that evolved. Of course, there were people doing wonderful work, but it was not as evolved as it is today. So I think that whole synergy of well-being in a hospitality environment was something which was very interesting. And then sometime around 2019, I'd spent considerable amount of time working in hotels and running Ananda. I ran it for nearly 8 years. So that's when I figured that there might be some merit in actually doing this for myself and starting my own company. Unfortunately, the timing was bad because we started just before the epidemic. So, everybody kind of struggled at that time. And then we kind of took off sometime around early 2022 because that's when things settled down. And of course, it took a while to build the company. And when we had started the company, it was called Hotel and Wellness Consultants. It was we were trying to pitch for a contract and someone says that, what is your company called? So I said, we don't have a name. It's just, we're just putting it together. So what do you do? So I said, we consult to hotels and wellness. So we said, okay, we are hotel and wellness consultants. So that was how we started out. Things picked up, started getting business. But of course, the name was misleading. We were getting a lot of work, which was not in the wellness space. So around middle of 2023, we rebranded, we put out a new logo. We did the whole sort of relaunch of sorts. And that's when Transformative Wellness was born. And thereafter, we realized that Transformative Wellness is very advisory, consulting, strategic. It works at the board level, owner level. It doesn't get into operations a lot. And that's when we realized that there was a gap and we were getting a lot of queries about how to operate the wellness that we create, from training to setup to even operations. We were getting a lot of concern from owners in that space. And I at one point felt that this would start impacting our business in Transformative because people who were kind of sitting on the fence about wellness would not go towards wellness because they won't know how to operate it. And that's when we added this, the second identity, which is SpaCraft, because I didn't want to confuse the two. So we added this second identity called SpaCraft, which essentially looks after training, procedures, setting up, help with interior design, hand holding through opening, and also finding operators. Sometimes people don't want to operate themselves, then we help them find operators. So that, in a nutshell, is what I've been doing for the last few decades now.
No, that's amazing. I mean, what a background. And there's so many things to touch upon. Oberoi, Ananda, your company, launching at ISTA as well. Really excited to get into each layer. So I suppose from the get-go, joining Oberoi, you mentioned it was a job, it was in the grounds for opportunity, it was grounds for training, but it was hospitality still. You could have perhaps found a different role in F&B perhaps, or something outside of hospitality. What really got you into the hotel space initially?
So, I think so. Firstly, like I mentioned, it was just by accident that I stumbled upon this management training program. But it was a very, very tough selection process because it was really the one of its kind in those days. And once you got in, you realized what a wonderful sort of an organization that you were with. A lot of things that companies talk about today, Oberoi Hotels was already doing at that time. Not just in operations, but also in people development, training, learning. The products, my God, the hotels were absolutely marvelous. I mean, even today, they are benchmarks for anybody who wants to build a hotel, go and see one of theirs. And then, of course, it was very interesting because they allowed you to think. And you kind of really use your mind to be able to even learn because it gave you learning across. I mean, we've learned everything from laundry to creating a hotel project and everything in between, food and beverage, front desk operations, security, engineering, everything we kind of were exposed to in those days. It was very interesting, very sort of engaging, very challenging because, I was not from, so I didn't go to hotel school. I did a bachelor's degree. So people who go to hotel school for 3 years or 4 years have a head start on people like me. So for me, everything was new. I'd never seen the back of a front desk in a hotel in my life till I actually walked in there to train. So I think it was very, very stimulating. So that really kind of caught my fancy. Things like even a simple thing like a night shift was absolutely a novelty for me. I'd never done a night shift in my life before. So started that, and then my first in Oberoi Hotels, they don't put you into a department and then you spend the rest of your life there. Of course, the kitchen is different because there it requires a lot of technical training. So chefs kind of continue. But of course, as they grow in the system, a lot of chefs do become general managers in that company as well. But that's a different story. So when we started, I went straight into the front office, which was a very sort of logic driven, numbers driven, very structured way of doing work, which kind of appealed to me because I was a student of mathematics. So it was a very easy transition for me to get into that space and look at revenue. And we had just sort of green shoots of revenue management had come into India at that time, and they allowed you to deliver on the learning. That was also important. So yeah, so that kind of kept me going. And then different roles, I worked with different hotels in the company. I was all over the country, which was interesting in its own way because you get to see a lot of the country, which you may not have otherwise. And then, of course, as every hotelier will tell you, to have the opportunity to set up a new brand, create the whole brand architecture, and open the first hotel in that brand. I mean, there's nothing better than that in our business.
Absolutely. Now, before we go into ISTA, I'm actually just really curious. Let's say you were at a happy hour and a coworker or your co-founders are next to you or partners. How would they describe you in a nutshell?
Interesting. So I think curious, wanting to a little bit, don't look before you leap, or whatever the saying, whatever the
Yeah.
quote goes about that. Because I do like to, don't like to overthink things. I do like to try things out. And I think also they would probably say very particular about work, but off work hours is all right. It's good to have fun with. Yeah. I mean, I'm the kind of person, I guess, where people, it depends, I get along with very few people because I think alignment is something which is important for me. And once I find alignment with people, I find it very easy to work with them, play with them, whatever. So yeah, I think that's kind of what they would say about me.
Very cool. Well, I
Yeah.
ask because it's something that I'm curious, folks like you in the well-being wellness space, how they think, how they operate. And so this is just a little glimpse into who you are, peeling back the surface a little bit. But sounds like you're a regular fun guy to be with, and obviously you love work. So it's nice to just hear that kind of background. That said, I'm really curious to hear your next evolution, which was opening hotels. You created a whole new lifestyle brand. How was that process for you in terms of taking a new leap, jumping into something you didn't know?
So actually, it was very, very interesting. And I think that's something that I needed at that stage of my career because I had been running hotels for a long time, various kinds of, well, not hotels, but parts of hotels for a very long time. And this was actually an opportunity to create from the design stage. I got into this hotel or this company when they were still a hole in the ground. They were still kind of finalizing the design, the architecture. It was a mixed use development. It was in Bangalore, which was a booming market. I mean, those days, Bangalore was like, you just had to put up a building and it would rock, literally like that. So it was very exciting in that sense. And, opening a hotel is a very complex job. Sometimes it looks very easy from the outside, but when you start getting into the detailing, it's actually quite a difficult task to achieve. And, putting a team together, making sure that they're all aligned with your vision and with the owner's vision eventually. So it's quite a tough role. And, being there through the construction, through the interiors being done, through the entire hiring, the opening, the setting up of the food and beverage concepts, the naming of the restaurants, it's almost like you're bringing up something from scratch. That was a great learning, I must say, and something which I'm very grateful for even till date, because a very few general managers get an opportunity to get it involved with a hotel from that stage. So, the learning is humongous, it's tremendous. And I was very lucky to have had that opportunity. And the hotel fortunately did really well. It kind of took the city by storm, and we did a fabulous job. The team was absolutely amazing. We still get together once in a while now. I was in Bangalore last week, and some of us were together again. So it's actually quite a marvelous memory, I must say.
That's fantastic. I mean, you also mentioned it went from 1 to 5, and I'm sure it's still an existing,
Yes, yes,
successful brand, and
yeah,
so that's just so exciting to just have been part of that history, and you're right, it's such a complex job that I think a lot of people overlook.
yeah.
You think that it's actually a large team of people doing it, but in reality, it's actually somewhat of a small task force that
It is.
people underestimate
Yeah.
the power that each individual has, and
Yes.
how small the team ends up being actually. So,
Yeah. In fact, the
that sounds
hotel in
amazing.
Bangalore is very much there, and I stay there when I go to Bangalore, so that's even more special for me.
Amazing. Well, I would love to go into the wellness space a little bit.
Sure.
Especially nowadays, we hear the word wellness everywhere, right? And so it feels a little bit cosmetic almost because it's kind of just thrown at everything. What is actually changing in hospitality right now when it comes to wellness?
So, I think hospitality is having to react to the guest because the guest is much better informed. They know exactly what they want, and they are no longer satisfied with wellness washing or well washing or whatever the term for it is, like greenwashing. They're not interested in well washing anymore because they understand what needs to happen. And I think a lot of hospitality is kind of aligning their working or aligning the offering to what the guests want. So perhaps left to hospitality, we may not have evolved so much, but since the need has come, so therefore we have to. So what's happening is, or rather, what was happening was that wellness was mistaken for something which was in the time then. You did a nice spa, you ate a good meal, you slept well for one night, and we said it's wellness. But that's not true. The reality is that wellness is something which is far more intrinsic. It's something that has to come from within. The desire has to come from within, and the results have to be felt within. So I think a lot of the hospitality space is now beginning to realize that just a few massages, a salad bar, and a comfortable bed are not wellness anymore. People are looking at outcomes, and therefore you see a lot of diagnostics coming into even hospitality wellness. They may not be immersive, they may not be blood work and stuff like that, but there are a lot of scans and a lot of gait analysis and things like that, which can happen through machines, which a lot of the hotels are now introducing. The reason for that is because people are demanding results. They don't want to just feel good in some abstract sense. So I think hospitality is realizing that they're changing the way they look at their wellness offering and are now talking about well-being, not just wellness, because every step of wellness that you take eventually has to lead up to well-being. And mental health is becoming a big thing now because in fact, interestingly, we were talking about my company earlier. We are perhaps the only company in India, and maybe, I don't know, maybe even in the world, who actually has a trained psychologist as a member on our board. So,
Mhm.
and she's not from hospitality at all. So, the reason is because everything that we do, we believe that eventually has to link up to your mindfulness and how you feel in the mind, because the power of the mind is what creates wellness, right? So we actually went to that extent, and this is all hospitality. We're not talking of any medical work. I think that's where hospitality is heading, and people who are keen to genuinely make a difference to people's lives will flourish, and people who just want to put it there as part of the offering will fall away by the wayside sooner or later.
I totally agree. I think wellness trends have been plastered around everywhere, talking about saunas, steam rooms, and that ends up being more of a programming for hotels more than anything. And as you mentioned, people actually want to take away something. And yes, there's some physical elements to it, like tests and results that can really transform you and help your well being. But if we're trying to put well being aside and really focus on wellness as a term, it's so exciting to hear that your team has someone on board, psychologist, to help them through that mental clarity that people are always trying to seek, right? And so
Yeah.
people are not just coming to seek some R&R and peace and tranquility, but they're really trying to transform and change the way they think, which I think is really truly part of this like wellness, well-being, um, concept that people are truly chasing. This mental health trend, or I guess the more awareness in this space where it's more normalized now, is the backbone of where people are like, well, I want to take care of myself. I want to be more self aware. I want to be
Yeah.
more gracious to myself. And being able to live through that and finding a place such as a hotel to actually experience that and giving yourself that time to change it's exciting. I know we kind of just talked a little bit about this, but what are some one or two big mistakes that you're seeing hotel do when they say they want to do wellness?
So I think one of the biggest mistakes they make is making it very spa centric because, again, massages and treatments and all can only do so much. A holistic approach is what is required. And the other, I think, is in terms of spatial designs and the look and feel of how they create. So wellness has to be, through the entire resort experience, you have to feel wellness. You can't have islands of wellness. You can't have just the spa doing it or just your yoga center doing it. It has to be through and through, right from pre-arrival, arrival, how you feel, the look and feel of the space, how you're served, the food and beverage offering. So it has to be a holistic experience, which a lot of people get wrong nowadays. They kind of tend to make a bit of a mishmash out of it. And while they have everything, they invest capex on everything, but it doesn't have any outcomes.
Yeah, so it has to be something that is really thought during the research process, right? And designing process of
Integrated with the
thinking,
entire experience. That's
right.
how I would describe it. Yeah.
Right. It has to start as a philosophy. So, do you think we're entering an era where every, serious luxury hotel needs a wellness strategy, and not just a spa? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, 100%. Because, in fact, what is very interesting is that I was just talking to someone the other day, and this was a chain hotel, and we were suggesting to them that, look, you have your central computers, you have your central information systems where you track what I like to eat, the kind of room I like, what is it that I want in my amenities when I come, and so on and so forth. But why can't you have my wellness needs in a continuum? So if I stay at X hotel in Delhi, I have a certain workout, I have a certain yoga protocol, I have maybe like a certain massage, this is my diet. Why can't I get the same thing in Mumbai? Why can't I get the same thing in New York? Why can't I get the same thing in Bangkok? So wherever I am traveling, I don't have to say that, oh, I'm going to miss out on my wellness schedule for 2 days or 3 days because I'm at this hotel. So if you can track my favorite wine, you can track my favorite cigar, if you can track my favorite whatever dish, then why can't you track my wellness schedule? How difficult is that? Every hotel, every luxury hotel has a wellness facility. There may be different levels of immersion. You may have a yogi in India who's really well qualified. You may not have someone equally well qualified, say, I don't know, in Chiang Mai, which is a little bit of a remote location, but you do have them. So why can't you make sure that I'm able to follow what I do at home everywhere I go, whichever one of your hotels? Look at the loyalty it will create, right? So I don't think luxury hotels have the option of escaping wellness anymore and authentic wellness because, luxury is about how you make people feel. So if wellness is just all sort of, glass and steel, it's not going to make people feel good. So you will have to create authentic experiences. So yes, absolutely. I don't think there's any escaping that anymore.
Well, that's a very powerful thing that you said, because what I took out of that was that hotels need to really step up the way that they inspire and they make their guests feel a certain way. And not just from the spatial designs or the hotel lobby. It's really about how they incorporate aspects of their programming and the way that guests enters and interact with their hotels to a more broader thematic theme, which is well-being and wellness, as you mentioned. That's a really powerful distinction in how hoteliers should start thinking with their new concepts or bring some uniqueness to their spaces. It's opening my eyes to how you're actually thinking of hospitality, which is very cool. Well, that said, I want to bring us back to perhaps a location that gave you a little bit more of that philosophy or that exposure, Ananda. And to just to tee this up for those who might not know, Ananda in the Himalayas is quite famous because it's one of the most exclusive wellness sanctuary, attracting Oprah Winfrey, King Charles, Bill Gates, countless of A-listers. And I think this location sits on like 100 acres overlooking the Ganges, but it's not just the view, it's really the philosophy. And I think Oprah said that it was more of a pilgrimage than a vacation. And guests don't just detox, they undergo deep emotional healing, spiritual studies. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about your time there, right? You spent years at the Ananda. You led it as well. One of the most respected wellness destinations in the world. What did
Yes.
that experience reveal to you about why people really came to wellness retreats?
So essentially, I think it was the transformation that I saw, like I mentioned to you earlier, where people, I mean, I've seen people coming in on wheelchairs and walking out in 15 days. That's it's hard to evaluate mental transformation because unless you really sit down with people, and when you're in a setting like that, you don't get those opportunities to sit for hours and talk to people what's happening in their mind. But when you see physical transformation like that, you realize that these places really really do wonders. And they're not just commercial operations, they're not just hotels in that sense. Of course, I mean, it's a business and we all have to realize that, but the genuine, authentic warmth, the feeling, the way it works on the mind, the way you create circumstances for people to want to feel better, the way our teams used to work with people. So they were not like hotel staff, they were like your wellness partners or wellness sort of advisors. Every team member in the hotel knew what you were doing, what you were there to achieve. So every touch point was aligned towards what you were wanting to do. So I think these are the kind of things that really changed my perspective, because when you work in city hotels, the guests are not so engaged with the hotel itself. They come in, they have breakfast, they need a nice room, they have a nice dinner, and it's quite a detached sort of a experience. But of course, you still need to give them a good, warm, efficient experience. What happens is that you need that kind of an environment, and it has to be integrated at the leadership levels. Everybody from the top down has to culturally be aligned to well-being. And I think that is something that Ananda did brilliantly. Right from the ownership down to the intern, everybody understood why a guest was there and what is it that they were looking for and how do we deliver that. So that, I think, was probably the biggest differentiator between any other place that I had worked before and Ananda. And of course, the protocols, the modalities, the whole Ayurveda, yoga was very, very authentic. It was not, none of it was trendy or something that was, just done for the sake of it. It all had a purpose. The program had a purpose. It was very holistic. You had your program, you had your yoga, you had your diet, you had your time off. You were encouraged to think for yourself, find places, even read, for example. Very often the practitioners there would recommend books to read. So so you kind of, and it was a bit of an island of well-being because it's up on a hill. So the location that way was very important. So what it allowed people to do was to study themselves, their habits, and see what is it that they were looking to change. Because I can tell you, Justin, you should sleep early, wake up early, but until it comes from within, you're not going to
Mm,
do it. Or you may do it for a couple of days and then say, not happening. So how do you make people look within, understand what is going on within them, and the desire for change should come from them, not because the circumstances or the atmosphere is getting them to do it. And
uh,
that is the difference between well-being and curative medicine.
mm,
Because when you go to a doctor in a typical or a hospital, you already had the issue. Whereas well-being is about recognizing what could become an issue and fixing it before it does. So if you ask me in one word, what really changes is habits. It's
mm,
habits that need to change.
mm,
If you are able to change even a small habit, nothing is going to change overnight. Nothing is going to come with a big band and noise, and changes will happen slowly, slowly until one day you just sit down and say, hey, listen, this is now not how I would have reacted to this situation maybe 6 months ago.
right,
So that's
right.
where the mind comes in, right? Because you kind of, how that entire change within you comes so that your mind starts thinking differently.
Yeah. That's
So that's
powerful.
something that well-being has to kind of address.
Right. Change within. And that's very well put way of saying habits is what people tend to rely on, but that's what you need to change to then really have the well-being or the exterior also change alongside you. If not, nothing's going to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right in the beginning, you mentioned that someone was able to stand from their wheelchair in 15 days. What transformation has surprised you the most at your time there?
So I think, I mean, of course, obviously we weren't, we didn't, we were not, we were a holistic kind of a facility. But I think what really stood out for me was the way that a lot of people with lifelong diseases and lifelong problems that came to us, absolutely bereft of hope and bereft of anything good happening to them. When we were able to transform them to believe that whatever they are going through and whatever will happen, but whatever time you have left, live it well. I think that was a wonderful transformation that we were able to create in a lot of people. Again, we were not a medical center. We don't claim to have cured any diseases essentially, because that's not what it was meant for. But the whole hope, hope is the word, that the way people get hope from knowing, and from the way they were in those 12, 14 days at Ananda. I think that was perhaps the most marvelous transition I have seen in my life of people.
Amazing.
I have learned from it. I mean,
I'm
I have learned
certain you
from it.
did. So, what was that shift for you? You came in from a structured hospitality background. You took on more business objectives as a GM and opening different hotels, creating a new brand itself, and then moving more into something holistic, wellness, well being. What got you into that initial jump? Because it's obviously a very different space, and the training, I'm sure, is completely different. As you mentioned, you become a guru, a practitioner, a guide to your customers, to your guests, instead of more of a hospitality, service oriented person.
So, interestingly, the move was a very sort of practical, real life change that happened, because
Business.
like I don't know, well, yeah, I mean, I told you I was running those hotels, the ISTA hotels. I was running Pune and Hyderabad at that time. And those got took over by the Hyatt. So I had a choice whether to continue and, work with the Hyatt, or move to Ananda, because there's a position there as well. So I'd spent some time at Ananda, because when we were opening our first hotel in Bangalore, all the pre-opening work happened at Ananda. So I'd spent a year there. And it kind of stayed with me, and I said, this is the kind of place I would like to work in someday. And so it was really the opportunity to run a place like that. So like I said, it was a very practical decision, because it was not something that I had done earlier. So it was an opportunity to run a place like Ananda, luxury, the kind of guests that were coming, to see how we could work with them. So I went in as a hospitality specialist, as a hospitality driven general manager. Of course, the nature of service was different. We understood that, and that's, it's not really. But how immersive it became as a human being is something that I learned as I went along. When you actually kind of, again, I don't know when it happened or how it happened, but it just suddenly dawned on me that the responsibility for another human was far greater for me now, because people were coming in with a certain level of trust. Like when you book a business hotel, your company ties up with the hotel, you go stay there, you pay your bill and you leave. But when you choose a wellness destination, there's a lot of research that goes into it. There's a lot of thought process, because you are entrusting your mind, body, and soul to that place. So somewhere it just hit me that look at the kind of responsibility you have now towards the person, not the business. And I think that's where the transition began. I became much more empathetic. I became much more, my listening skills improved. I learned how to be more sort of, oriented towards the human in the guest, not just the guest as a number or a room number. So these little changes started happening in me. And then, over the years, I think that's the space I developed in. Obviously, in 6, 7 years, you don't become a practitioner in that sense. I mean, if you ask me to do a massage, I can't do it, because that's really not what I was learning to do. But how to make people feel, how to understand people better, how to understand their needs better as a human being, that's something that really changed within me. And I think that's what's really helping me with my business even now, because we don't really look at it as a pure sort of numbers and profit and loss, balance sheet kind of a business. We look at it more as how much difference can we make? How much
Mm.
can we, how much can we encourage people to change? How do we create wellness offerings that make people want to change? So, the vision is a little bit aligned towards that and not just the money and finance and so on.
Yeah. Well, it's so inspiring that this one place, this experience changed you personally,
Thank you.
and the way that you look at life and the way that now you look through hospitality and how you want to kind of change that industry. And I know you just mentioned we're moving away from business, but kind of wanted to, kind of dive deeper into the operational lens of how you actually treat your business. It's one thing to believe in wellness philosophically, but it's also another to operationalize it, train teams, redesign guest journeys, align owners, and make the numbers work. And so, today through transformative wellness as well as SpaCraft, you help owners and operators embed wellness into hotels from concepts to operations. What does that process look like? I know you just mentioned numbers are not the final thing, but obviously when you handle and deal with owners, that's all they talk about. Walk us through kind of a day in the life of what you do today.
So when we started the company, obviously we were looking for business and we had to pick up whatever we got. And we got a lot of retrofitting projects where the spas existed or the wellness facility existed, and they wanted to activate that space, create something with that place. So we did a lot of those kind of projects, but they were not satisfying because the design, you were kind of trying to plug things in and, oh, okay, this room can do this and that room can do that, but it was not really designed for the purpose. So initially, of course, we had to do a lot of those kind of projects because you had to get the company going, reputation built, and you had to have some nice hotels on your portfolio to show what work you've done. But as we went along, we started being a little more choosy and started doing only greenfield projects. So these are projects where we get involved right from the conceptual stage through the architecture, design, the interiors, the entire offering, the food and beverage, the entire gamut of activities within. So that kind of helps achieving what we want to achieve a little bit easier. Of course, so what happens is that the way we like to work is we don't impose our vision on the owner. Right, because there are so many ways of doing wellness. There are capex heavy wellness, there's capex light wellness, there's a mix of the two, there's holistic, there's medico spa, there's medical. There are many ways of doing wellness. So first we have to align the owner's vision with the owner's vision to understand what is it that they want. And if their expectations are way off from what they think they want, that's the time we need to get in and start advising them and telling them. So that's where the advisory role comes in, how the market will react to this, what kind of revenues do you expect to earn later on, what will work, what will not work. So I'm not a big fan of trending things because things that wellness can't be about trends. It has to be something which is sustainable from a business point of view. So, we go through a lot of these iterations with them. And then based on that, we start designing the entire wellness vision for the resort or the hotel. So that makes it a little bit easier. Of course, capex it becomes a big, very important sort of a, but that also you can work around because the level of equipment and the level of people available is quite, the spectrum is pretty large.
Mhm.
So if somebody has good money, you can get them the finest hydraulic beds from the UK with, all the works and lights and sounds and colors and everything. But if somebody is not, then there are options available within India. So there are various sort of bands in which you can create wellness. Fortunately, in India, salaries are still not at the global level, and there are very good practitioners and therapists and all available. Of course, you have to train them, which is what SpaCraft does, but they are available for at a pretty reasonable price. So we have to kind of put all of these things together and kind of create a concept that aligns most with the owner's vision. Doesn't always, because they are not wellness experts. So yeah, so that's how it typically works. And so what happens with greenfield projects is that a lot of the work happens pre-construction. So and then they go into constructions. That's the time, those 2.5 years is when we help them build up the entire operation. And of course, 6 months before the hiring, then 2 months before the training. Those are very sort of 3D kind of activities that one has to do. So that's how it typically works in greenfield projects. Retrofitting is faster, but not as fulfilling for us as a company.
Right. And I think you also mentioned in earlier too, spatial design is so important when it comes to
Yeah,
creating a holistic environment. And sometimes it's hard to do a plug and play, right? You might hire some great practitioner, but if the surroundings doesn't echo what they're trying to put out there, it's really hard to absorb and really change that habit, as you mentioned. And
definitely.
so I want to double click into the owners that you work with. Some people might come to you with the clear mandate of saying, well, luxury is wellness. I need wellness. Tell me more about wellness. But they have no clue about wellness. What are some things that you're noticing with these conversations that hoteliers are thinking wellness differently?
So I think what is really changing among the hotel owners is that firstly, a lot of them are themselves now practicing wellness. So a lot of this wellness thought comes from personal experience of the owner. They may have had some great experience or they may have gone through something that required a wellness experience. So that kind of makes our job easier because they've understood what it can do. But one thing which I see changing a lot is that they are realizing that wellness is not isolated islands of modalities. There is a continuum, there is a certain process that it has to follow. And therefore, you can't create facilities or programs that are just one here, one there, one thing here, little thing there. So there has to be a circuit, there has to be a completion, that everything is a whole. It's not just one activity. So I think that's the biggest change. So, where when so okay, like for example, we talk of contrast therapy a lot. So earlier they would say, oh, I put a steam, why do I need a sauna? Oh, I put this, why do I need a chill? But now they realize that the contrast therapy requires you to do this circuit of three things, which then, when they are imagining the capex or they are envisioning the capex, they know what it's going to cost and they're easier to convince. Of course, why not this one? Why a 4 foot by 6 foot? Why? So those are then different discussions which are at a very operational level. But I think that's really what is changing. That, why do I need to have a treatment room? Why does a scrub room have to be a different from a Swedish massage room? So I think they get those conversations now. They are also better informed, and so that's really what is changing.
And that's just great to hear because then it's not like they're just throwing the term wellness to
Yeah.
try to increase the ADR, right? It's really about allowing guests to take away something after their trip. Folks need to think about spatial design, but thinking about the actual practitioners in this case, what roles should practitioners, mental health experts, or emotional healing practitioners play in future hospitality design? Is that something that people should really consider moving forward, having, a couple of staff live and breathe that sort of mentality or and background? Or is that not as necessary when it comes to a wellness retreat or wellness spa?
So, you use two words. One was a wellness retreat and the other is a wellness spa. So in the retreat space, you definitely need people who work on the mind, emotional healers, psychologists. You need people, life coaches, because these are places where people spend a longer period of time. So you are able to work on their mental and emotional health through interventions which happen during their stay. In wellness spas, which are more sort of resort oriented or more city hotel oriented, that may not always be possible because you're not really staying for a longish period of time. However, when we create these offerings, even in the city hotels or the urban spas, we have to be very mindful of the fact that a lot of people are coming in because of the chaos and the confusion that they are facing. We bandy around words like stress, insomnia, gut health, but eventually this is what is creating all the issue in their life. So whenever we create programs or we create journeys, even in urban settings, we have to be very careful that they are working on the mind as well. And therefore, if they are inspired through mental health professionals or emotional health professionals, they will definitely be far more effective. In a
Mm.
retreat setting, you can actually do like 2 3 day programs where half a day you work with a mental health professional and the rest of the day you carry on with the program, almost in a sort of a journey or an emotional health retreat kind of a setting. So they work differently, but yes, mental and emotional health, in my view, and it says in our company sort of delivery promise also, that mental and emotional health has to be the ultimate outcome of anything that we do.
Guests today are arriving at hotels with very different expectations. They're not just tired, right? They're mentally overloaded, they're digitally fatigued, they're emotionally searching for something. What is the modern wellness traveler actually seeking that traditional luxury doesn't necessarily address?
The modern wellness traveler is seeking relief from the modern world. The modern world is overload of noise, chaos, digital devices, and just general, lack of grace and empathy among people. So what people really are seeking are a sanctuary from that and an opportunity to go within and understand that these are my realities. When I go out from here again, how am I going to cope with them better? And that's something that a wellness retreat or a wellness facility has to create for them, the opportunity to search within and the opportunity to find the answers that help them create these strategies for themselves. So
Mm,
that really what it is. Yes, of course, expectations are different. Some people may come with a physical ailment. Some people may come with a mental sort of a overload. But when they come in, they really are just looking to find solutions. And what's
fantastic.
interesting is that these solutions lie within themselves.
So, you recently stepped into a strategic advisory role with Loomis Legacy Partners around wellness and experiential hospitality in a broader asset management context. And
Mhm.
why is it important that wellness be thought about at the asset level, not just the operational level?
So, what happens typically is that we may create an absolutely fabulous wellness offering at the time of opening, right? But over time, these things tend to get a little bit diluted because, sometimes a practitioner is gone and the new one has not come in. So you bring in someone who may, these are operational realities. And over a period of time, the wellness starts getting diluted. And by the end of it all, you're not achieving even a fraction of what you set out to achieve. So, what happens when we tie up or we do these strategic alliances with companies like Loomis, who are end to end solution providers? We are able to integrate wellness with every action that they take, right from finding investors to building to opening to running and operating at a sustainable level. So these kind of strategic partnerships help us to stay engaged with every process of planning, building and operating a resort or a hotel. So that's why these become very important for us. And we are then like the conscience keepers, just a little bit here, a little bit here, and make sure that the wellness vision stays aligned to what it was meant to be originally.
Oh, that's
So that's
great. Yeah. And
part.
I think, as you mentioned, I think greenfield projects are probably more important too when it comes to wellness, right? There's so much more that people might be underestimating.
Yes.
And so, on that note, do you think developers, owners are still underestimating how much wellness can actually influence the positioning, pricing, and guest loyalty in general?
So, honestly, I think the underestimating is kind of not so much now. People do realize the potential. I think what happens, it's like, it's uncharted territory for them. So they're not convinced in terms of whether they can create something of that sort or not. So I think there's what they really need is an understanding of how it works. Pretty sure that it works. And every developer, owner, I mean, even real estate is now building around wellness. We've done some work in the real estate space as well, where they wanted to build these residential apartments around wellness. So I think the realization is there. It's very high. It's just that sometimes they're a little apprehensive of being able to execute it. And that's where people like us come in.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, at least gurus and practitioners like yourselves are there early on.
Mm.
And it's also interesting to hear that, there isn't such a drawback from trying to push these wellness experiences. Looking ahead, what does the next 5 years of wellness hospitality look like to you?
So I'm completely certain that it's going to be a mix of technology and holistic because technology is what will provide us the metrics that the holistic modalities can work upon. And, also, like I mentioned earlier on, it's going to become a lot more result oriented. So for results to show that technology and diagnostics have to play a very important role. So it's going to be everywhere. It's definitely in some level going to find its way in every aspect of hospitality. And it's going to be driven by technology and performed by traditional or even holistic healing methodologies. I think that's what it's going to be for the next 5 years.
Going into that a little bit more, we're seeing, as you mentioned, the distinct modern science of like technology or like red light therapy, chiro, longevity testing, while in comparison, we also have more of these ancient practices and systems like yogas and kind of these more retreats, right? How do you think those worlds should come together in the future?
So, in my view, I think the investigation process has to be done through technology, and the preventive and habit changing elements have to be handled by holistic practices, because those are what are sustainable. Pill popping, IVs, and all are okay, but in the long term will have an impact on your health. So, whereas traditional healing methods are gentler, they work slower, but they work longer. They address the root of the problem. So I think that's something that we have to be cognizant about.
It's great. And what parts of today's wellness trend cycle do you think will fade and what will become foundational to many of these hotels?
So, nothing is really going to fade at a macro level, because things are evolving so fast. 10 years ago, the changes that were happening were so slow, but now every week, every month, something new is coming up. I think the method by which it is delivered might change, especially on the technology front, because something or the other new will come up, some new concept will come up. I believe, equipment will change, machinery will change, the way we measure it will change. Perhaps we'll have a more detailed and a more sort of drilled in view of every human issue, which can then be addressed. But, ancient sciences have been like that for thousands of years. That's not going to change. Again, the delivery may change, how we use them may change. We may understand them better as we go along, because there is still research going on in those spaces. But essentially, I think at a macro level, not much is going to change. We just have to keep refining it, drilling it down further, making it more and more. The efficacy has to increase. The credibility has to increase. So I think that's really what's going to the efficiency. A lot of work happens now through these scanners. So how do we make it more and more accurate?
Yeah,
That's really going to continue changing.
definitely. And perhaps there might
And
be
the
a
other thing, sorry,
bigger,
the other thing I see changing is a more sort of a democratization of wellness. In India, wellness was a very publicly available process. We lived well. I mean, we didn't have to go to a restaurant to eat turmeric. Ayurvedic practices were available to us easily. Yogic practices were available easily. But the minute they came into the luxury space, they became unreachable for a lot of people globally, not just in India. So I think the democratization of wellness will also happen at some level, where hotels and resorts will realize that they have a larger responsibility to the community, to the people around them. They're already looking at employee wellness with a different lens. So that's probably going to expand as well.
fantastic. Well, yeah, I agree. And I think there also will be maybe a bigger, broader distinction between wellness and well-being. Like how I just learned
Absolutely.
that during our conversation. It's been truly cool to just hear your perspective and background because it does change the lens that I view wellness, truthfully. So that's a great takeaway for me. But I would love to hear from you, some wisdom for hotel owners or operators listening now. I know you mentioned there's a lot of things that many folks should consider, like spatial design and really thinking about wellness from the get-go. But what's the first step for hoteliers if they want to build a more meaningful wellness offering for their spaces?
So, this is my favorite line, and I say it to all the owners I work with: don't do anything for effect, do it only if it is effective. I think if we all follow this dictum, we are sorted. We don't have to worry about anything. So, nothing flashy that doesn't work, nothing glitzy that doesn't help. It's just a waste of your money. Put something that will actually make a difference to people's lives. That's it.
Well said. And for younger folks entering the hospitality space, what truth about, people service do they need to understand early in their hospitality career?
So I think good old hospitality was always about how we made people feel, and you can't make people feel good through processes. So I think the fundamental of hospitality is that it is two people interacting with each other and creating memories, creating experiences, and creating a connection. I think we tend to forget these very basic human values when we talk of hospitality these days. So anybody who's able to do these few things well will be a great hotelier.
Great. Well, you hear it first from Nikhil. Now I would like to go into a very fun round. It's the rapid fire question round. I'm going to ask you a couple questions and you can just share what's the first thought that comes to mind. Are you
Okay.
ready? Okay.
Yeah.
One luxury hotel habit you'd eliminate forever.
Sugar loaded breakfasts.
Okay. Most underrated wellness practice in everyday life.
Movement.
Are you more of a traditional practitioner or a modern science person? What gets misunderstood the most?
I think tradition gets misunderstood the most.
One destination in India more people should experience with fresh eyes.
Anything around the Ganges. Uttarakhand, where I live, definitely.
If you could redesign one part of a typical hotel to improve wellness and well-being, what would it be?
The lobbies.
All right. Well, Nikhil, this has been such a rich conversation. What I'm really taking away is that the future of hospitality may not be about excess, but about alignment, right? Alignment of body, mind, space, and intention. But before we wrap up, what are you most excited about building right now? And where can listeners follow your journey?
So I do a lot of work on LinkedIn because I think that's really the right space for this kind of thinking and engagement. The most exciting project we have right now is that we are creating a medico wellness destination which will be front Ayurveda forward. So it'll be all the healing modalities will be driven through Ayurveda. The idea is to actually create allopathy like credibility for Ayurveda because Ayurveda has some marvelous successes available to it, but they're not spoken about much and not showcased too much. So I think that's something which we are looking forward to doing. And I think about 2.5 years from now, this facility should be open and we'll talk about it at that time.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited for what's to come. I'm so
Thank you.
glad that we met, Nikhil, and thanks so much for the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you for reaching out. It's a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. If this episode sparked something for you, follow the show and share it with someone who loves hospitality. A rating or review helps more listeners discover these stories, and it truly means a lot. Know a founder, operator, designer, or innovator who should be on the podcast? Send me a DM or email. All links are in the show notes. And until next time, stay curious.